The air in the motor pool administration annex hung thick and heavy, a chemical stew of three dominant odors. Stale, reheated coffee left simmering since 600, the acrid, penetrating vapor of industrial-strength diesel cleaner, fighting a losing battle against the omnipresent slick of grease, and finally, a bright, misplaced scent of pine and bleach, the signature of a determined but low-priority effort at sanitation. Yabo Montgomery stood perfectly still, her shoulders slumping just enough to project anonymity, but not enough to suggest weakness. Her uniform, a faded, thrice-laundered set of OCPs, was clean, but bore the permanent stain of labor, a faint chalkiness on the knees from scrubbing concrete, and a damp, lingering odor of disinfectant that clung to the synthetic fabric like a second skin. She was holding a request slip, pinched between a thumb and forefinger, the paper already softening slightly from the moisture on her hand. Beside her, leaning against the grey metal partition, was the object of her trade, a wheeled plastic bucket, its murky water swishing softly with the movement of the building's heavy ventilation system and the head of her mop, a heavy, cotton monstrosity, slightly frayed, smelling sharply of wet earth and ammonia. The fluorescent lighting above buzzed with an oppressive, rhythmic hum, casting a sickly yellow sheen on the cheap modular furniture and the pale, stressed face of the man seated behind the logistics desk. Sergeant First Class Brennan, Logistics Supply NCO, was a man whose career had been defined by the distance between his chair and the nearest combat zone. His uniform was starched, the creases so sharp they could cut paper, and his rank gleamed with an almost ridiculous polish. He had the doughy, discontented face of someone who saw every request as a personal imposition, especially those that didn't involve shiny new toys or high-ranking signatures. Brennan didn't look up immediately. He was engaged in the highly critical task of trying to coax a half-empty bag of Cool Ranch Doritos to stand upright on the edge of his cluttered desk. The crunching sound of the plastic bag crinkling was the loudest, most aggressive noise in the room. Montgomery waited. Patience was her oldest weapon, honed in places where time stretched like taffy between life and death. Finally, Brennan slapped the Dorito bag down, leaving a faint orange dusting on the desk ledger. He let out a sigh that was more air expulsion than fatigue, and lifted his head slowly, his eyes, small, brown, and deeply cynical, gliding over Montgomery. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a nuisance, an administrative bottleneck in the shape of a low-grade grunt whose needs were utterly beneath his consideration. "Yeah?" Brennan's voice was a low, nasal drag, dripping with condescension. Montgomery pushed the request slip across the desk, not sliding it, but placing it precisely on a clear corner of the blotter. "Sergeant, I'm requesting the industrial polymer floor wax and the specific non-conductive solvent, item 74 Delta, for the SCIF cleaning rotation. The standard issue cleaner is causing residue buildup, and we risk conductivity issues on the subflooring." Brennan didn't even pick up the paper. He squinted at the rank tab on her sleeve. "Cabo, right, Montgomery." He made it sound like a clerical error. "You realize where you are, right? This is logistical supply. We handle items that matter. Weapons, munitions, parts for multi-million-dollar vehicles, not floor polish. Sir, the secure compartmented information facility requires a Class A clean," Montgomery stated, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "The residual static from the buildup contaminates the environment. The operational readiness of the 303rd depends on that room being secure and operational 24/7. Brennan laughed, a short, unpleasant bark that vibrated the loose pages on his desk. "Oh, the 303rd depends on your Swiffer skills, huh? Look, Cabo, I've got orders for 20 million rounds of 5.56 sitting here, and 3 generals waiting on clearance for new satellite arrays. You're asking for specialty solvent. Item 74 Delta is a controlled substance for high-grade electronics maintenance. It's not for cleaning up spilled coffee in the janitor closet." He finally picked up the request slip, holding it delicately by the corner as if it might contaminate his fingers. He let his eyes scan the quantity listed, then tossed it back onto the desk. Denied. Low priority. You want high-grade solvent? Get a major to sign off. Until then, use the bucket of brown soap you've got outside. That's what we pay you people for. The grunt work. Keep the facility functional, sure, but don't try to play SIGINT specialist because you read a chemical label once. The insult landed not with a crash, but with a faint, stinging hiss. You people. The subtle dismissal of her entire existence within the hierarchy. Montgomery took a slow, deep breath, tasting the dust particles suspended in the air. The chemical composition of the room suddenly felt claustrophobic. She stared at the desk, not at Brennan, but at the reflection of the buzzing fluorescent lights in the worn veneer. Then, a faint sound, almost swallowed by the ventilation hum, registered in the periphery of her hearing. It was coming from the highly specialized encrypted communication headset that she habitually wore around her neck, tucked beneath her faded collar, a piece of gear that cost more than Brennan's annual salary, authorized only for personnel operating within Level 4 secure areas. It wasn't static. It was a rhythmic, highly compressed digital squawk, a burst transmission. Her mind, despite the surface layer of janitorial duty and fatigue, instantly switched modes. The sound was distinct, a specific digital handshake protocol favored by a hostile foreign entity known for its fast, untraceable data dumps. Brennan, oblivious, leaned back in his squeaky chair, crossing his arms over his chest. Something funny, Cabo. You look like you just saw a ghost. Montgomery's eyes, previously dull with resignation, narrowed by a micromillimeter. Her focus was now absolute, split between Brennan's arrogant monologue and the almost silent data packet hitting her receiver. She knew the location of the satellite uplink. She knew the typical encryption layers. This burst was premature. It shouldn't be happening now. Brennan continued, enjoying his power. Maybe if you spent less time polishing floors and more time on actual duty assignments, you wouldn't be stuck running maintenance requests. What's your MOS anyway, Cabo? 88M? Drive a truck? He chuckled to himself. Montgomery didn't respond to the taunt. She barely heard it. Her fingers, stained faintly yellow from bleach, twitched once, unconsciously reaching toward the small, worn keypad of the communication unit hidden beneath her collar. The enemy transmission was repeating the burst sequence, a sign of urgency or failure to transmit. She needed absolute silence. "Sergeant," Montgomery said, her voice now dangerously low, demanding attention without volume. "I need you to be silent for 60 seconds. Brennan's jaw dropped slightly. "Excuse me? You're telling me to be quiet? You low-grade—" And that's when the memory flooded in, a sensory tsunami washing over the pine sol smell and the stale coffee, dragging Montgomery back across 6,000 miles and 7 years of accumulated trauma. The sound of the burst transmission had opened the floodgates. Nakasun, Act 2, The Dust and the Code, 2,100 words. The sound was not the whirring static of a domestic comms issue. It was the sharp metallic ping of high-speed data transmission, the same sound that had once saved and irrevocably broken her, Afghanistan, 2017. The air was thick, not with diesel fumes, but with fine, talcum-like dust that coated the inside of her mouth and throat, tasting perpetually of scorched earth and metallic decay. She wasn't Cabo Montgomery the janitor then. She was Specialist Montgomery, attached to a highly sensitive signals intelligence unit, operating deep in the Torcum corridor, embedded with a rotational Polish Grom team. Her uniform was crisp, not from starch, but from fear and adrenaline. They were 3 kilometers south of a designated HVT extraction point, the mission already 3 hours past schedule and dangerously exposed. Montgomery was hunkered down in a shallow wadi, the rough, dry earth pressing into her side through the Kevlar vest. The weight of her gear, the radio battery packs, the cooling systems for the decryptors, the weight of the PKM the Grom contingent insisted she carry as backup, was crushing, pushing the air out of her lungs in ragged gasps. The night was moonless, illuminated only by the sterile green-washed world of her PVS-14 night vision goggles. The sound environment was critical. The low, steady whisper of the wind, trying to strip the sand off the rocks, the distant rhythmic thump-thump of a US Predator drone orbiting miles overhead, and the faint, high-pitched whine of her own equipment running hot. Her primary task was listening, not to voices, but to the silence between the voices, to the digital noise floor. Her Polish team lead, Major Kowalski, a man whose face was a roadmap of old scars and permanent exhaustion, tapped her shoulder lightly. The tap felt like a massive weight, a reminder of the 20 lives depending on her concentration. Montgomery, anything from the eastern net? Target is moving too fast. We need confirmation of the crossing. Kowalski's voice was a barely audible rasp through the comms. Negative, Major. The HVT's known network is quiet. Too quiet. They haven't keyed the beacon. If they cross, they'll use the 700 series burst. I'm running deep analysis on the ambient chatter. Lot of low-band noise, possible local jamming attempts. Hours crawled by, measured in the agonizingly slow drain of the battery life and the increasing pressure in her chest. She had chewed through the inside of her cheek until the salty taste of blood mingled with the dust. Then, at 0347 Zulu, it happened. Not on the expected HVT frequency, but on a commercial microwave band. They were monitoring as a long-shot possibility, a quick, violent burst. It was the specific sequence of coded pulses, rapid-fire, highly compressed, lasting less than 0.8 seconds. It was the digital squawk, the 700 series. Major, I have a confirmed 700 series, unscheduled frequency. They're jumping channels. Source? Kowalski demanded, his position shifting slightly, the sound of sand scrunching beneath his boots. Local repeater 2 clicks north. They're using a new encryption key, sir. I'm running the differential analysis now, but it's fast, too fast. I need time. In SIGINT, time was the unit of failure. This burst, she knew instantly, was not a casual location update. It was a critical tactical warning. She ripped her gloved hand off her weapon and slammed it down onto the keyboard of her primary terminal, her fingers flying across the keys in a blur of muscle memory. She didn't look at the screen. She felt the code. She was working the decryption matrix manually, bypassing the automated systems that were too slow for this highly sophisticated key. The sound of the burst was still echoing in her ears, a phantom ring. She had managed to capture the first 3 data packets, but the remaining 3 were scrambling in the airwaves. Crack! The sound was not digital. It was immediate, physical, and lethal. The distinct, tearing sound of an AK-47 opening fire from the ridgeline to the east, followed instantly by the sickeningly close whiz of heavy rounds snapping past her head. They were compromised. The HVT hadn't used the code to communicate their location. They had used it to warn their ambush team that the coalition forces were in position. Ambush! Ambush! Kowalski roared into his comms, the sound overlaid by the frantic, heavy breathing of his team engaging the threat. Tracers lit up the night, painting the landscape in lethal red streaks. Montgomery dropped her head, the impact of the steel helmet against the dirt a dull thud, but her fingers kept moving on the keyboard. Her life and the lives of the Grom team now depended not on her ability to shoot, but on her ability to read a sequence of ones and zeros while under direct fire. A Polish soldier, Specialist Radek, who had been covering her immediate flank, cried out, a sharp, strangled noise, and then the comms went dead for his channel. A wave of hot, acrid smoke drifted over Montgomery, the smell of burnt propellant and Radek's equipment. Focus. Ignore the blood. Ignore the fact that Radek is gone. She needed to break the code. She needed to know what the transmission warned the ambush team about. Her screen was a frantic cascade of hexadecimal characters. The decryption key was layered. She executed the first pass, stripping away the outer shell, revealing a sequence of geographical coordinates. Standard procedure. But beneath the coordinates, the critical message was hidden in the remaining data packets. The firing intensified. The roar of the PKM fire directly above her position was deafening. Metallic thunder aimed at suppressing the enemy line. Montgomery's breath hitched. She identified the error in her key assumption. They hadn't used a standard shift cipher. They had used a fractional substitution based on the ambient air temperature at the time of transmission, a field-expedient, highly localized code. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the massive neurological demand. She input the ambient temperature data gathered from her environmental sensors, 34.7 degrees, into the algorithmic framework. The screen flickered violently. The remaining data burst, resolved instantly. It wasn't a tactical command. It was a warning about what to expect. The decoded text scrolled across her screen in harsh, glowing green letters. Wait, Delta Zone is baited. Quad A and B rigged. High explosive. Wait for C4 detonation on exfil route. IEDs. They hadn't just ambushed them. They had pre-rigged the entire extraction zone. They were trying to herd them into a kill box. Major Kowalski, stop the advance. Montgomery screamed into her mic, the desperation making her voice crack. The noise of the firefight was overwhelming. IEDs, Quad A and B are rigged. Do not advance past the Wadi line. The exfil route is salted, Kowalski heard her. There was a pause in the heavy machine gun fire, a full, terrifying 2 seconds of silence as the Major processed the sudden critical data. Then Kowalski's voice came back, strained but professional. All units, hold fire. Fall back to the western embankment. Repeat, IED warning, eastern perimeter. Montgomery, confirm kill box location. She spent the next harrowing minute using her terminal to mark the coordinates precisely, calling out grid references, while rounds impacted the dirt mere feet from her exposed position. They managed to suppress the ambush and retreat, but not without paying the price. Specialist Radek was gone, sacrificed to buy Montgomery the seconds needed to complete the decryption. Later, when the dawn finally broke, painting the harsh Afghan landscape in bruised purples and burnt oranges, Kowalski found her, still huddled over the smoking terminal, her uniform soaked in Radek's blood, her face a mask of grime and shock. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his vest, pulled out a small, heavy silver pin, the Krzyż Walecznych, Cross of Valor, awarded for acts of significant bravery and tactical importance under fire, and pressed it firmly into her hand. You did not break, Specialist, he had whispered, his voice thick with loss and respect. You held the line with numbers. You saved my team. This is not from us. This is from them. He nodded toward the silent, empty ground where Radek had fallen. Montgomery had never spoken of that moment, nor the cross. Upon returning stateside, she requested a transfer to the lowest possible profile, non-operational status she could manage. The guilt of surviving, the sheer weight of what she had seen and done, demanded penance. She chose anonymity. She chose the mop. She chose to protect the skiff, the nerve center, to ensure that no one else would face a 0-second decrypt deadline in the field because the communications environment was compromised by dirty flaws. Act 3. The Cipher and the Respect. 1900 words. The smell of pine sol snapped Montgomery back to the present. The fluorescent light was still humming. Sergeant Brennan's face, puffed with outrage, was inches from hers. You demand silence from a logistics NCO? I'm writing you up, Cabo. I don't care if you clean the general's private latrine. You show respect in this office. Now get your little mop bucket out of here and use whatever slop they gave you last month. Request denied. Brennan reached out a thick finger and viciously stabbed the denied stamp onto her requisition form, leaving a smear of red ink across the paper. The precise moment the stamp hit the paper, the rhythmic digital squawk from Montgomery's hidden comms unit intensified, followed by a rapid, triple sequence burst. It was the same protocol, the foreign 700 series, but the signature was slightly different, indicating an elevated threat level. Montgomery's entire body tensed. She didn't flinch, didn't move her eyes, but every nerve ending focused on that sound. She was no longer a janitor. She was a terminal receiver, a live wire antenna dedicated to intercepting and processing. The hell are you staring at? Brennan scoffed. Did you not hear me? Get out. The burst pattern is escalating, Montgomery murmured, her lips barely moving, the sound intended only for her own ears, yet cutting through the administrative noise like a razor wire. She was already running the first differential analysis in her head, comparing the ambient temperature of the secure facility, monitored by her integrated sensors, against the frequency noise floor. Just as Brennan was about to launch into a full-scale tirade about dereliction of respect, the heavy steel door of the logistics annex swung inward with a controlled, silent authority that instantly altered the gravitational pull of the room. Master Chief Petty Officer Hayes entered. Hayes wasn't just an operator. He was a walking monument to the kind of warfare that leaves no witnesses. A SEAL Team 6 veteran, currently serving in a highly classified advisory role, his presence was rare, intimidating, and generally only preceded by news of impending global catastrophe. His uniform was impeccably fitted, functional, and devoid of unnecessary flash. His eyes, the color of slate under a winter sky, scanned the room in a fraction of a second, cataloging the scene. The aggressive log NCO, the stressed low-ranking cabo, the red denied stamp, and the mop bucket. Hayes was there to sign off on specialized ordnance, but he paused instantly. His attention was not drawn by Brennan's volume, but by Montgomery's stillness. The profound, unnatural calm in her posture, combined with the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her right hand, a sign of massive internal focus. Brennan, seeing an E9 walk in, instantly straightened, his face shifting from petulance to obsequiousness. "Master Chief, can I help you, sir? Just dealing with some facilities maintenance issues." He gave Montgomery a dismissive flick of his hand. Hayes didn't look at Brennan. He took 2 steps closer to the desk, his presence causing the air pressure in the room to drop. He was looking only at Montgomery, specifically at her collarbone area, where the faint rhythmic sound was emanating. Hayes had heard that specific 700 series digital squawk before. It was a language he understood, a signal that belonged only in secure, desolate places, not a stateside supply office. "Cabo," Hayes's voice was gravelly, low, and utterly commanding. "What is that noise?" Brennan jumped in, trying to control the narrative. "That's probably just her cheap headset, Master Chief. You know how these low-end supplies are. I just denied her request for specialty materials." Montgomery ignored Brennan, focusing entirely on Hayes, recognizing the authority in his gaze. She didn't have time for protocol. The burst sequence was hitting its 3rd repetition. She took a breath and, without raising her voice, she began to speak, translating the newly received data in real time, overlaying the raw code with her deep institutional knowledge. "The burst is non-standard frequency, Master Chief. Repeating sequence 700 series, high speed 0.8 seconds duration, utilizing fractional substitution key derived from localized environmental data, likely based on barometric pressure and ambient humidity variance. Target package is transmitting confirmation of Phase 3 execution." Hayes froze. Phase 3 execution. This was classified information, known only to the deepest levels of intelligence community. The information referred to a planned hostile infiltration into a key European command structure. Brennan was slack-jawed. "What in the hell are you talking about, Cabo? Barometric pressure. Just get out!" Hayes silenced Brennan, not with a shout, but with a look so cold, so heavy with implied violence, that Brennan physically flinched, stepping back until his chair hit the filing cabinet behind him. "Phase 3 confirmation," Hayes repeated softly to Montgomery, his eyes narrowed, calculating. "What is the target parameter?" Montgomery's focus was intense. She processed the final fragmented data points now. "Target parameter is confirmed designation Iron Wolf. Coordinates are..." She hesitated, the geographic references flipping through her mind, converting the obscure digital code into grid coordinates, recognizable by NATO forces. Grid Alpha 7, Norway, 0400 Zulu. The message specifically includes a 3-digit authentication code needed for physical access. The code is 440. Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the catastrophic implications. If Phase 3 executed, the consequences were beyond measure. And this Cabo, this janitor, had just cracked a 0-day encryption key in a public supply office, using only her mind and a low-grade field receiver. He opened his eyes and looked at her, not at her faded fatigues, but into the bottomless reserve in her eyes. He recognized the look. It was the haunted, hyper-vigilant gaze of someone who had done the impossible under impossible pressure. Hayes leaned across the desk, completely dismissing Brennan's sputtering presence. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't need to. He needed to confirm his hypothesis. He leaned in closer to her collar. There, faintly visible beneath the seam of the thick collar of her OCP jacket, was a tiny, intricate line of stitching, a reinforcement perhaps, or a tailor's error. But Hayes, having served extensively with Allied Special Forces, knew better. It was the anchor point for a foreign combat decoration, placed just so that it was almost always hidden, a profound sign of a warrior who sought zero recognition. Hayes reached out a single finger, gloved in soft leather, and gently, with the reverence of touching a holy relic, tilted the collar slightly. Brennan watched, utterly bewildered, and there it was. Not the decoration itself, which was likely stored elsewhere, but the highly precise, almost ceremonial placement of a specific mounting pin, the subtle indentations of a ribbon bar that had once rested there. Hayes recognized the distinct, unique width and spacing reserved only for the most distinguished Polish military decoration. Hayes inhaled slowly, the air rattling slightly in his lungs. He straightened up, towering over the desk. He looked at Brennan, who was now sweating profusely, sensing the seismic shift in the hierarchy of the room. "Sergeant Brennan," Hayes said, his voice now low, controlled thunder. "You just insulted a soldier who holds the Krzyż Walecznych." He pronounced the Polish words with careful, deliberate respect. Brennan paled. The what, Master Chief? Is that some sort of foreign cleaning award?" Hayes ignored him. His eyes remained locked on Montgomery. He began to speak, his voice rising, every word a deliberate hammer blow into the stunned silence of the supply office. "Cabo Montgomery, Specialized Signals Intelligence, assigned to the 303rd SCIF Clean Crew, rank as listed, Specialist E4. He paused, then his voice took on the tone of a citation being read on a parade ground. "But not listed here. Attached to NATO Contingency Force, Apji Pustini Sikzur, Afghanistan. Cited for tactical distinction and acts of profound valor under direct, overwhelming fire." He nodded toward the hidden pin impression. "The Krzyż Walecznych, the Cross of Valor, awarded by the Polish Republic, is not given for maintenance, Sergeant. It is awarded for actions taken while facing down the enemy, where one's life is directly forfeit for the lives of comrades." Hayes stepped back, his gaze burning through Brennan. "She was awarded this decoration, not for driving a truck, Sergeant, or for shuffling paper, but for identifying and decoding a fractional substitution cipher used by foreign hostile actors in real time while taking heavy machine gun fire, saving a full 20-man GROM unit from being led directly into a kill box of high-explosive IEDs. This woman, Sergeant, saved the lives of NATO operators through sheer brute intellectual force and sustained concentration under conditions that would break 99% of the combat force." Brennan's face had lost all color. He looked down at the red "denied" stamp on the paper, then back at Montgomery, who still stood perfectly still, the mop handle resting lightly against her forearm. Her eyes, however, were now distant, focused miles away on the coordinates she had just extracted. The truth of her identity, the magnitude of her sacrifice and expertise, crushed the arrogance out of Brennan instantly. His knees looked suddenly weak. Hayes looked at the mop bucket, then back at the desk. "She is requesting a specialized solvent, required to maintain a Level 4 secure communications facility, an environment critical to national security. She understands that environment better than you understand the price of the ink in your stamp, Sergeant. He placed his hand flat on the requisition form, covering the word denied. The safety of the 303rd's communications array is not a low-priority facilities issue, Sergeant. It is the direct consequence of the kind of expertise that just saved us from a potential disaster in Norway. Hayes turned back to Montgomery, his posture shifting from confrontation to absolute respect. He reached up to his shoulder, unhooking the sling of his weapon, a highly customized, heavily weighted Mk-18 Mod 1 carbine, the pinnacle of close-quarters combat weaponry. It was his personal rifle, a tool so intimately customized that it was essentially an extension of his body. It was his most prized, most sacred possession. He cleared the chamber with a precise, metallic clack-clack, ensuring the weapon was safe, and then held it horizontally in front of him. "Cabo Montgomery," Hayes said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet annex. "The mission you just identified is now being addressed by the highest levels of command, based entirely on the 3-digit code you extracted in this office." He then flipped the carbine, turning the muzzle down toward the ground, the ancient unspoken gesture of peace, trust, and ultimate surrender to competence. Hayes extended the Mk-18 toward her. "I am Master Chief Hayes. This weapon has kept me alive for 9 years. I want you to hold this, Specialist. This rifle goes to those who hold the absolute line. You have earned every second of respect this Corps can give you." He pressed the cool, black weight of the rifle into her hands. The metal was smooth, perfectly oiled, smelling faintly of gunpowder and fear. Montgomery received the rifle silently, her hands, accustomed to the rough fiberglass of the mop handle, gently closing around the pistol grip. The weight of the Mk-18 was comforting, a familiar, terrible truth. She didn't look at the rifle. She looked at Master Chief Hayes. A faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. A silent, deep communication between two soldiers who spoke the language of sacrifice in encrypted bursts. Hayes then turned to the frozen Sergeant Brennan. "Sergeant, you will fulfill this request immediately. You will apologize to the Cabo for your insolence and your ignorance. And then you will remember her face, because you just learned that rank tabs and job descriptions mean absolutely nothing when the world is on fire." Brennan stammered, his face clammy. Master Chief, I didn't know. Cabo, I sincerely apologize. I'll process 74 Delta immediately." Montgomery didn't wait for the materials. The real mission was already underway. She handed the Mk-18 back to Hayes with the same silent respect, her eyes already calculating the next encryption layer the hostile entity might use. "Thank you, Master Chief," she said softly, her voice now clear and focused. The exhaustion momentarily lifted. She turned, picked up the handle of her mop, now just a tool, no longer a disguise, and pushed the wheeled bucket toward the door. The wheels squeaked faintly, a sound of mundane duty. As she passed the threshold, Hayes was already on his secure satellite phone, his voice rapid, commanding, and focused on the coordinates she had provided. The mission was moving, and Cabo Montgomery, the janitor, walked back toward the skiff, back to the silent, critical work of maintaining the purity of the communications environment, carrying the full, invisible weight of a hero who preferred cleaning floors to wearing her own medals. She was ready for the next burst. She was always listening,